Let everyone connect. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, it's a bigger turnout than I was expecting. That's wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're on the East Coast, you may be dealing with Hurricane Nicole heading your way or already there where you are. So stay safe, everybody. As always, there always seems to be some weather event or a pandemic or some other crisis we're dealing with, but we managed to get through them okay, thank goodness. Again, my name is Jill Kagan, and I'm director of the Arch National Respite Network. It would be great if you all want to say hello in the chat. Let us know what state you're from, and if there's anything in particular that you're hoping to get out of today's collaborative. I think we'll have some time after our two collaborative members share their resources. I think we'll have some time to have questions and answers, and you can all share your updates as well. We're going to be a little less formal today than we usually are. The collaborative members who have so graciously agreed to present will be sharing some tools and documents, and I'll be sharing those mostly through the chat. We do not have any formal PowerPoint presentations today, and I just want to reiterate that one of the purposes of this collaborative is to offer you all an interactive knowledge exchange on volunteer and faith-based respite. So again, we invite and encourage you to ask questions and offer your own experiences and add to what our presenters are going to be sharing. I do want to give you a little tidbit on mini grants through the Lifespan Respite Care Program. Since the states were funded through this program in 2009, one of the significant ways that grantees have sought to meet the requirement to provide planned and emergency respite services has been through mini grants to community and faith-based organizations. And thanks to these efforts, the grantees have been able to share some very useful tools and produce very important lessons learned. And you can find these on the Arch website, and in 1 minute, I'll put that link in the chat. So we have been gathering since 2009 the tools that the states have been using, and I hope you'll be able to take advantage of those. Not all of these mini grant programs were designed originally to specifically build volunteer or faith-based respite, but states like Alabama, Colorado, New York, South Carolina, Wisconsin, they continue to use the mini grant approach to increase the reach of existing respite services, whether they're faith-based or volunteer involved, especially if they're serving unserved or unserved populations, or they may use these mini grants to start up funding for new innovative efforts, or test a new way to deliver services or recruit respite providers. For example, in Wisconsin, they have a core, what they call their core grant program that supports agencies in hosting community and outreach events that help recruit respite providers and educate caregivers about available services. North Carolina, some years ago, built a network of sustainable community-based respite options, primarily with non-traditional partners like the Parks and Recreation Department. And they also use those mini grants to test a respite planning tool for caregivers, and they demonstrated that caregiver burden was decreased when the tools were used to help a caregiver planned use of their respite time. So they've also been, these mini grants have been a fertile ground for evaluating a particular approach. The possibilities are really endless, and today we're going to hear about two states that use mini grants to build faith-based and volunteer respite opportunities. And they're really, I've asked them to really focus their remarks on the mechanics of designing and implementing such an approach, so you really can get a good feel of what it takes to plan for these programs, develop a request for proposals, design an application, monitor grantees, and then try to cull all of that into lessons learned. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Kathy Mayfield Smith from South Carolina, and then we will hear from Dina Prest in New York. So Kathy, I turn it over to you.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Jill. Good afternoon, everybody. I am hoping that my internet lasts through this presentation. Fortunately, we don't have too bad a weather yet, but we are starting to get wind and rain from Nicole. So hopefully we'll be able to get through this and have a really good discussion. Just to let you know, I have some colleagues on the phone too. Melissa Price, who is our interim director for the South Carolina Respite Coalition. She's, I think, in her car picking up her son. But if she's available at the time, she may actually add some things to this presentation. And then Jenny Andrews from the South Carolina Department on Aging, who is the actual lifespan grantee. Melissa and I are with the Respite Coalition, and we're partners in those lifespan grants. And then I think if she was available, Sheila Lewis, who is with our Alzheimer's Resource Coordinating Council, is also on this call in case there are questions related to one of the programs that I'm going to talk about today. But I thought I might give a little bit of some contrasting views on the types of mini grant programs that we have in South Carolina. The two that I'm going to talk about are our experience, as Jill said, with our lifespan respite grants. We have used mini grants in a couple of those programs in order to stimulate the development of respite in South Carolina. But we also kind of view it as experimental programs because it really does allow us to learn what works, what doesn't work, in order to form the future activities that we're going to engage in. And then the other one, and those particular mini grants are smaller in nature. They range from like 2,000 to 6,000 since we're using the grant funds for that. Those are also mostly volunteer-based programs. And we have focused a lot on developing those programs within faith-based organizations because the South Carolina Respite Coalition and frankly the South Carolina Department on Education has a long history of working with the faith community in South Carolina. So the Respite Coalition, the two types of mini grants that we have used early on in one of the grants, we really used very small mini grants, about $2,000 to $3,000, and offered that to faith-based programs. And it was really kind of more of a wide open, really just seeing what kind of creative programs that we would get. And then we moved in one of the more recent grants to a more formalized and structured approach to the mini grants. And so we'll talk a good bit about that. But that was the one that we used that required the establishment of a break room model, which I've talked about earlier in one of these collaborative webinars. And so that was really more structured. We had clearly more requirements in that mini grant approach that we'll talk about as well. And then the second mini grant program in South Carolina is one that comes out of our Alzheimer's Resources Coordinating Council. And that's actually funded through our state legislature. That program is administered, as I said, through the South Carolina Department on Aging. And annually they receive $150,000 from the legislature for mini grants up to $20,000 each, 1 year mini grants up to $20,000 each. Those fund respite and Alzheimer's education programs. And those particular mini grants are very formalized and structured since they're coming out of that state agency. And I'll get into more details about that later on. But one of the things that I wanted to just address is how we assess the state need and how we really determine whether or not we're going to, how many grants might fit into that. We actually do surveys from caregivers and kind of have an ongoing survey for that. But also, I think our strategic planning committees have been the most helpful in really determining what the needs are and where mini grants might be most useful. We have a state committee on respite that really advises those planning, the lifespan respite grants. We also have regional advisory committees. We have 4 of those around the state. And then the Alzheimer's Resource Coordinating Council has a governor-appointed planning council. And both of those develop state plans. And so those help guide what each of the organizations are doing. And that, again, helps us define what we're going to do from a mini grant perspective. Before I get into the nuts and bolts, which I know is really what Jill wants us to talk about today, is the nuts and bolts of having mini grant programs. I just wanted to talk about the benefits that we have found from using mini grants. I think what it has given to us from that grant perspective and from the development of a coordinated lifespan respite approach, it's been a really good way to engage a variety of organizations across the state in providing respite. It's offered a lot of creativity in the various types of respite programs that are developed, because we firmly believe that there's no one size fits all, that there's a continuum of respite opportunities and respite services that can be developed to address the needs of people across this state and in their homes, in their community. It's also a real cost efficient way to offer seed money to start new programs. It allows you to really kind of control those costs, but to actually get things started and help nurture those along the way. And hopefully some of those will be longer lasting respite services for families. I think the other thing that I really appreciate about the mini grant programs is that it allows us to advance learning, not only in those communities, but in the state and then in the respite network. Because we all get to benefit from what each other learns. And instead of recreating the wheel, this gives us opportunities, I think, to share that information. So all of our mini grant programs do use an RFP or an application process. And I think that I would like to reiterate the importance of those documents in really identifying and selecting the programs that you're going to work with or that you're going to fund. It does several things. It really ensures that planning and preparation. And I think for us, in working with the faith community, we have found clearly that the faith groups are more successful if they have gone through that planning process and that they've really examined, what is needed and how they'll actually meet those needs. It also ensures that leadership in those organizations are involved in the program from the start and have already given their support to doing it. Because in working with the faith community, we have found that if leadership is not involved up front, that it can really delay the development of a program or even stop it in its tracks. So I think the RFP or application process helps with that. And then it also helps you determine the capacity of the organization and their ability to fulfill what you're looking for in providing those mini grants. So I think those things are critical aspects when you are developing a mini grant program. So Jill has several of the sample documents, and I want to thank Sheila Lewis from our ARC program for providing the documents for their mini grant process, because I think they really do provide good examples of how to structure one of these mini grants and be sure that you have engaged as many people as possible and that it's objective and fair, but also gives the reviewers and the agency the information needed to be able to be confident in the potential success of the programs that they award. So Jill's putting them in the chat. I don't know if any of them, she'll be able to call any of them up, but there is an ARCC sample RFP or application. I think we call them applications for both the ARCC and the ones that we've issued through the Respite Coalition. But but you'll see that the types of information that is requested in that cover sheet really gets at all the, the grantee information, who the organization is, what the contact information is, the signature that is needed in terms of who will be accountable with the program. And then the kinds of things that are really part of the application is the description of the organization, where you're really getting an idea of the type of organization it is, whether it's faith-based or community-based or something else in terms of who's applying, the capacity of that organization to be able to implement the mini grant, what the program is really going to be, what their experience has been, organizational structure, and then what resources they would bring to the table, whether it's physical, in-kind, people, space, all of the kinds of things you want to look at in terms of being sure they've got what's needed. Then the problem statement, I think this is really, again, where they have to think about what they're doing. Who is it that they're trying to serve? What is the need that their mini grant is going to address? Who will they be serving? What is some of the data that would back that up? How many caregivers are in their community or faith-based program, and what other kind of data do they have that supports the need? Because you really want them to look beyond just some anecdotal kind of things. And then the next item is really the proposed program. What are they proposing to do? Is it going to be a center-based program? Is it going to be something else that's utilizing volunteers in their program? Is there a proposed schedule of providing respite? Would it be weekly, monthly, or a specific schedule that they have? Again, how are they going to staff it? The ARCC programs, because they are $20,000 awards, they really look at staffing and often have paid staff that will provide these services. The ones that the Respite Coalition has awarded really mostly is based on that volunteer model and pulling in folks from whether it's the youth group or whether it is other volunteers that are a part of their congregation, looking at the staff skills that are there. One of the things that we recommend, even though that we're volunteer, we're really encouraging the development of volunteer programs. We still recommend that there is at least somebody on staff that is providing that coordination and can really be held accountable, can ensure the training is provided and everything else that is needed, so that it's not completely volunteer based. Because often when we first started doing these programs, if it was completely volunteer based, all you really need is for a family crisis to happen, and then that the person who's coordinating it gets pulled off. But if it's a paid staff person that is responsible for the coordination and reporting, then it is easier to ensure the continuity of that program, either during development as well as for sustainability purposes. And then other things that are asked in that program application or program objectives. What are they really trying to accomplish? We generally encourage, 3. You don't want to get into too many because it becomes overwhelming. But if they think through 3 objectives that they're trying to accomplish, those are really pretty reasonable. And it focuses their efforts in really what they're trying to do. And then what are the performance indicators? What data are they going to collect? How are they going to measure whether they're accomplishing those objectives, and go ahead and looking at structuring some of those performance indicators? Because one of the things that we'll talk about too is some of the requirements. And I firmly believe that reporting, back is a critical piece of these mini grants. That's how we learn. It's how we know what's actually being accomplished. So we want them to think about the indicators that they would be tracking during their program. And then if there are any partner organizations, who are they? What role would they play in the grant? And so that, I mean, we're big proponents of developing partnerships and bringing organizations together. Again, I think that helps in the long-term sustainability of these type programs. So we want them to go ahead and think about that and identify those folks up front. And then sustainability plans. Given that these grants are usually awarded for just 1 year, what are your plans of keeping it going? How will it continue? Because you really do want these mini grants to be seed grants that are just the beginning of a program. And so sustainability, thoughts about sustainability and how that would continue is really an important part of this application. And then the budget. I think these are what Jill's showing now is really kind of the other documents that would need to be required, that are required for that ARCC grant. And then this is just a budget format, which is kind of a generic one that really makes them think about the types of things. I think for our purposes, we have modified for the break rooms. We have used this particular model of application itself, but modified it and shortened it for the break rooms, again, because our funding through the lifespan grants is much smaller. And we do provide a good bit of technical assistance and interact with these mini grant programs throughout the year. Because again, for us, they're kind of little labs of learning. And so we really try to be involved from a technical assistance approach to help them really get off the ground, but also to enable us to learn what's working and what's not working. But I think if you can, in your RFP, if you can, make sure you include exactly what you're looking for, then that is very helpful in getting you the information that you need. But I think even more importantly, helping your applicants think through all stages of these programs and what they're going to need to do to be able to actually develop whatever the program is that they're providing. Let's see. And then I think another thing too is whether it's done through the application or through the awarding process, just really an attestation that the people applying for these grants understand the reporting requirements and that they're agreeing to comply with those as a part of this application. Now, one of the things, and another reason that I really wanted to use the ARCC as an example of a mini grant program is the planning and recruiting and preparation for soliciting the award, because I think they really do a good job on that. Jill pulled up one of these documents earlier, but again, there are 3 documents in the chat that I think will give you really good examples of how to do this. And they really kind of follow, I think, state agency and or federal agencies models on this, but they have a notice of award of availability that they send out throughout their networks and post widely when the funding is available. And that, indicates the purpose of the funding, who's eligible to apply, what the level of funding is going to be, when the due date's going to be, really just trying to give the information needed so that that they're able to get as many applicants as possible for these awards. Then they actually host a pre-application webinar or workshop so that they can explain. This is very similar to what ACL does. All right. Do you guys still see me? I just had. Okay. I had to get back to see what you were showing, Jill.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
No, that's all right. So my screen went to something else, so I couldn't really see it. So so this is the notice of solicitation award, and so you can see that is what gets sent out that lets folks know this money is available to them, which is a critical part of being a program under a state agency, because it does require that the transparency and the notification. But I think it's a really good example of what can be done And then again, as part of that pre-application webinar and workshop, they provide an opportunity to go through what the actual solicitation is, what the requirements are, and then an opportunity to answer any questions for all of those who are interested in applying. And then just some of the planning processes and the thought processes that we have gone through is kind of deciding what the grantee requirements are. And this is again where there's a little bit of a difference between what the ARCC does and then the mini grants that we have provided through the Lifespan Respite grants. And again, there's I think some examples. We put the terms and conditions for the ARCC also as an example. I think Jill's got that in the chat. One example of the requirements is a matching requirement. The ARCC requires a 50% match, where those grants through the Lifespan don't really require a formal match. Although, given that they're volunteer-based, in general, there's definitely that volunteer labor could be counted as match, but we don't require a formal match. I think for the ARCC, I think that again helps build the potential for sustainability, because if they're putting up 50% of the match, then there's a real investment in the program and also an infrastructure for which to continue those programs if necessary. Training requirements for volunteers and staff. ARCC requires staff to take dementia dialogues because all of those are focused on Alzheimer's or dementia related target populations. So they have dementia dialogues and I think a list of other approved trainings. So, but they do require the staff on those mini grants to take that training in providing the service. We've, as a part of those mini grants for Lifespan, we have offered available training for those grants. For the break room specifically, we've included a list. If they're serving Alzheimer's or dementia, there's a series of those same approved trainings are made available. The challenge with those is that there is in fact a wide range. We don't require a specific target population. So we've had break rooms that are serving, many of them are dementia or Alzheimer's, but there are some that are serving children with disabilities. And then we have one that is actually a generational. They provide respite for children all the way up through older adults. So our approach with that has really been working with them to ensure that they have staff and or volunteers that have the training, whether they're social workers, special education teachers, but people who've worked with those populations and have that experience to be able to provide the support needed and the training of the volunteers in those local programs. So I think there are different ways that you can approach that. And again, our belief in that is that if you've got those volunteers and those people already in the congregation or in that program, then you have on-site people who are providing the supervision from an experience base, as well as adequate training to ensure that the volunteers serving that population have the training that they need. And then another requirement, as I mentioned earlier, is that data collection and reporting. I really believe that this, and with any grant, you have to have this as a part of it. So, but because it provides that accountability. And I think for us, it has also provided an opportunity to step in with technical assistance if needed. So if they've opened a break room, or if they've opened their program and they're not getting the participants that they expect, then we can come in and work with them on outreach and ways to recruit those family members that we've found successful in other programs. There's a sample also. It's an Excel document, but it's a sample of the reporting that we had our break rooms in the first year that they were funded, the type of information that we had them submit, and we asked for them to do it monthly, but it's a lot of it's, you know, the obvious kind of thing, the dates that they were open, the hours of respite that they provided, you know, number of volunteers, number of caregivers, whether they were male or female, and unique participants, unique number of caregivers, because a lot of them would, the break rooms were really designed to be, you know, weekly, and every time that the church was open. So during their Sunday service, or if they were, you know, offering it midweek, or if there were other options, but the number of people that they provided, the number of caregivers, the number of care recipients who were actually attending those break rooms, but unique ones, so that if there were different ones, you know, that came in throughout, or if you were providing respite to the same people over and over again, really trying to get a difference between what those numbers were. And then the needs of those folks. Were they people with dementia? Were they younger kids with physical disabilities, with autism or cognitive disabilities? So really kind of getting an idea of who they were serving. And then, you know, specific things related to activities and other kinds of things. So this is just a sample of how we really tried to make it as not very burdensome, because in working with the faith community, sometimes the administrative burden can get too much as they're trying to get these programs. So this was a tool that we developed that we thought was would get us the information that we needed, but would not be too burdensome for those faith groups to actually complete on a regular basis. The problem is that COVID came along. And so a lot of the faith community closed and weren't operating during this time. So there's another tool that is in the chat that is something that the Respite Coalition modified. And it's more of an annual report. So what we did is, with those break rooms that were open part of the time or not, you know, during COVID, it allowed them to quantify what had happened and what they had done and what some of the challenges that they faced were. So again, it's just another tool that we developed in trying to gather information when those break rooms were not open regularly. And then lastly, as I've talked about these mini grants being opportunities for experiments, with the break room, particularly in the first year that we used those mini grants and funded those, we actually required the grantees to participate in something we call listening sessions, which are like focus groups. Because again, the idea was to get, you know, to learn what they had done. And so we were able to document lessons learned through those listening sessions. And that actually provided the foundation for the how-to guide that we developed, that Jill has on the ARCH website in grantee resources. And it's also available through our website. But it's a pretty good guide to things, you know, if people are thinking about. As a matter of fact, the ARCC, I think, disseminated this to potential grantees for their faith-based programs as just an example of how they might, you know, as one model they might consider in applying for an ARCC grant. But that really, I think, provided us a really good opportunity to learn what was working, what wasn't working, what challenges they were having, and then together, you know, or what things they tried that worked, so that we could share those in that how-to guide. So that, again, is really one of the things I like about mini grants, because it really does give you that opportunity not only to grow respite across the state, but also to inform us and our coordinated lifespan respite efforts on what are the next steps, what are the things that we might want to consider in continuing to develop respite in South Carolina. And then, you know, the last thing I'm going to talk about really are those sustainability plans. We've not really required plans per se, but I go back to that RFP, and that is something that we've asked all of the grants to, or all of the applicants to think about. given that these are short-term mini grants and they're not intended to be continuing, is think about, what is it that you can develop that you can continue and sustain, and how you would do that. And so as a part of those applications, we ask that they, present how they would sustain the program once the grant funding is gone. And then I don't know, is Melissa, are you on the call and able to talk? Yeah, she's gone to pick up her son because schools in South Carolina are letting kids go right now in preparation for the storm. But one of the things that we're looking at now, because we are moving into a cycle where we have very little funding for those break rooms, even though it is still a part of our lifespan grants. And so we're kind of looking at how to modify the application, because some of the partnerships that we're looking at are going to be developed without the mini grant, the money to actually fund that. So we're looking still at an application that we would have interested partners complete. There she is, she's back. Interested partners complete, so that we can have that discussion. What does it take to be a partner? What does it take to actually develop programs, whether or not we have funding to give you or not? And so we're in the process of modifying that, because we still think that process is an important one. So I don't know if you have anything that you want to add.
From the transfer from Carr to here, I'm sure I missed some things, but no, I think that covers a lot of it. We're just trying to reevaluate when what you're offering is different. So the partners we're offering, like, it's changed. And so what can we require of them and ask in return? And so that's kind of where we are with modifying, which I think it's good to know that we can pivot and change and roll with the punches. But anyway, so there's a little input from me.
Okay, so that is really in a nutshell.
I think Kathy just froze up. Everybody froze up.
You didn't.
I think it might be you.
Oh, maybe, could be.
Yeah, I think I'm back. So, but no, all I was saying is that, it's telling me my internet connection's unstable. Good timing.
Yeah.
So no, I was just saying, that's really, briefly the experience that South Carolina has had with the mini grants process.
Well, that was really an excellent presentation. And does anybody have any immediate pressing questions for Kathy? And I apologize if I got the wrong documents up there.
No, you did very well.
I see some that I tried to post also have error messages. So
okay.
If we get permission to post all of them on the website, then I can send people the links to them. So don't worry if you can't download them now. I'm sure we'll be able to share those with everyone later. I don't see any questions. Let's turn it over to Dina to talk about their mini grant program in New York. And I'll putting some of her documents in the chat as well.
Great, thanks, Jill. I see that Doris Green did join. She was able to get out of her workshop. So I had volunteered, since she was going to be presenting at a conference today, to kind of step in her place in case she wasn't able to make it, but she is here. So I'll take lead, but she'll be chiming in and adding some details as we go along. And I know Jill kind of mentioned, the focus really was more on the mechanics of the mini grants and the process that we take. But I did want to just kind of share, just for an understanding here in New York, and it was actually before I think Doris was just coming into her position. But my understanding is that we really kind of went the path of mini grants as a way to roll out the REST model in New York with using volunteers, because we had a real desire to do that, but with the limited resources through Lifespan Respite, we were trying to figure out a mechanism that was going to allow for that kind of engagement across such a large geographic state. So that really was what I think spearheaded kind of like using mini grants initially, but we've grown through the years. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as a little bit of background of what got us started with using mini grants, and quite successfully. And we have also made tweaks as we've gone along, and Doris has learned a lot of things through the process, so have I. But I will say that as far as kind of assessing what we need here in New York, we're constantly doing that. If you're involved in some of the other learning collaboratives, we speak often about how frequently our core team meets and talks and, engages key stakeholders. We do strategic planning yearly, but we have held 2 statewide summits. With our most recent grant, we have a caregiver wellness and respite center in a rural area of our state, and we actually did a needs assessment to engage professionals within that 6-county community, and we're intending to do that each and every year. So that's like another mechanism for us to kind of just, make sure that we're seeing what's needed, and adjusting if and when we need to. As far as writing the RFP, and we did provide the most recent RFP. I think it's been pretty standard through the years that we've been doing them, but I will say that we have targeted though, so just as an example, when I mentioned that we initially did mini grants as a way to roll out REST across our state, our goal was to have REST trainers. It is a train-the-trainer model. If you're not familiar with it, we were intending to have statewide coverage. So we wanted a trainer that could be reached in every single county in all 59 of our counties. And we got to the point before the pandemic hit where we only had 5 counties left that we felt that we needed coverage. So one of the RFP rounds, we did actually target those 5 counties and let them know that we would give extra points if there was an organization that was interested in applying that would serve that community. So the advisory group, the Lifespan Respite core team, we're all involved with reviewing and scoring the proposals. Doris, she develops a spreadsheet with all the relevant information from the applications, including the amount that's being requested, the target goals, a short synopsis of their proposal so that the reviewers can all add comments. And we keep this document in a shared Dropbox file so that all the reviewers can add to the working document. And Doris will often reach out to participants to clarify questions that are brought forward by the reviewers as we're going through that before any decision making occurs. And we do meet prior to any decision being any notification to a grantee. But as far as how we decide on funding levels and what the optimum funding level is, when we prepare the grant proposal, another reason that we decided to incorporate this in our program is that there needs to be, as Kathy pointed out, one size doesn't fit all. You have to have different mechanisms of ways that you can expand respite in an economical way. And so there's always been a strong emphasis within Lifespan Respite to deliver respite care. And to be honest with you, until the voucher program for us in New York that was launched this year, we depended upon our partnerships and the organizations that we work with to really do more of the respite delivery. And our focus with the coalition was more on the outreach and education. And so having the REST model, using volunteers, offering mini grants, that was a way of being able to provide respite care through these funds. So thankfully now we do have vouchers and other ways that we're delivering respite, but really, 2011, 2014, those first couple of grants that we got, that, that's basically how we did it, was through these mini grants. So we've been fortunate here to really see an increase in funding through other funding opportunities, and also us kind of building and being able to take some of the resources through Lifespan Respite and shift them, that we've grown the mini grants. I would say the first few years was very low, with only about anywhere from 2,500 to 7,000 being offered, where now, you know, we're this last round, there was $92,000 total, and we have 7 grants, anywhere from $10,000 to $25,000. So we've learned that we seem to get more when we're offering more money. So, and I'll give Doris a chance to kind of speak to that, if she would like to add some more details about that. As far as requirements and setting grantee requirements, NYSERC does require the use of the REST model, or now, because we're offering the online respite training curriculum, that can be used as well. It's a nice format for people. So we do require that training is what they're using. We did rebrand the REST model, since, you know, they've kind of closed their doors. We still use the curriculum and adapted it for New York State. So we now call it the New York State Volunteer Respite Program. But both of the options, you know, they cover those 10 core competencies. And NYSERC is finding that the online respite training is a lot more convenient, especially for colleges and universities, you know, just due to their varying schedules and having the ease of technology for the students. NYSERC, something else that we did, I would say, I don't know, probably just a couple years in using mini grants, is that for trying to just have the reporting be better for grantees, they actually developed an online reporting portal, and they do require all of the mini grantees use this portal to report their data. As far as matching volunteers, we've really left that up to the organization, especially if it's you know, a model where it's one-on-one with the volunteer and the care recipient. You know, because some of the grantees already have an established process, and then there's others, you know, who are using the funds to actually develop a new program. We do leave that that matching and how they want to use criteria to match left up to them, but with technical assistance from the coalition. The coalition, of course, always supports them and offers them tools and resources. So regardless of the format of the volunteer respite delivery, NYSERC, you know, they don't participate in that matching or the scheduling of the volunteers. And like I mentioned, they instead provide the technical support. And some of these things are, they'll advertise the program on the website or, you know, in the newsletter. And then if they would like to consult with them, they of course will do that if it's requested. NYSERC approached the process with the idea of really building a lasting relationship, because, you know, really at the end of the day, these grantees have no obligation once the funding is done to provide us any ongoing data. But we have found that because of the relationships that have been built, that even after they're no longer receiving those grant funds, they are still sending us respite data on a long-term basis. And we've actually been able to re-engage several of the mini grantees with additional future grants. So we may have had some that got a grant, you know, the first round, say in 2017, and then they were awarded again this year. We offer these mini grants really to, you know, any organization that is willing to use volunteers in delivering respite. But, you know, we have AAAs, faith-based organizations, schools and universities, nonprofits. We have a nice chart, and I meant to pull this, and I can do it in follow-up, but I had included it in our final report for our 2014-2017 grant. And it actually shows the various organizations and the funding amounts, so we can share that in follow-up. The amount of technical assistance, and again, since Doris was able to join the call, she can probably speak a little bit more detail on this, but through the years that has changed. They definitely have developed a more sophisticated process. They found that if they really didn't communicate frequently with the mini grantee, the reporting was oftentimes spotty and incomplete. And the invoicing was sometimes a nightmare, particularly with faith-based respite providers who often are using volunteers to manage the fiscal part of the program. So they felt that they really had to kind of tighten things up with that. And they now have, you know, a more sophisticated process. And NYSERC also found that, you know, just with the constant expansion, really, they've just done a phenomenal job of tapping into additional funding sources through the years, that they needed more administrative support. So they now have a part-time administrator that will take on the responsibility of sending out monthly reminders to the mini grantees to remind them to report their data using that online reporting system. They use Google Docs, and then that dumps all the data into a spreadsheet. So what's being tracked is the number of volunteer hours per month, the number of caregivers that are served, the number of new caregivers each month, and the number of student volunteer hours. In that monthly reminder email, they also remind them that they need to have caregivers fill out the post-respite survey. I did share that survey with Jill too, so I'm not sure she wants to bring it up or just share it in the chat. But NYSERC reports that there has been some difficulty with this, where the return rate was very low for the first few years. So now what they do is they actually attach this survey every month with a gentle reminder that caregivers can actually fill them out at any juncture, and they don't have to wait until the end. So they found that, you know, grantees prior to that were like kind of scrambling at the end of the grant to hurry up and get the caregivers to fill it out. And then not all the caregivers were still actually receiving respite services, so they weren't inclined to fill it out. So that was a huge lesson learned. So wanted to make sure that everybody knows that you may want to consider making sure that you're making any surveys available right from the beginning, and letting them, you know, fill them out, because we know caregivers don't have a lot of time, and it can be time consuming and feel very tedious, but that data is very helpful. And we always remind the grantees that the more data that we have and we're able to share, you know, the better chances of securing future funding that will help to support them. So that's kind of the carrot for them. NYSERC also requires them to provide an interim report and then a final report. And that, I will tell you, from where Abby and I sit at the state office, when we're, you know, doing our federal report, that comes in handy a lot. And where it comes in handy, I feel like, is on the question when it relates to barriers. You know, because I feel like we do encounter some barriers for sure, but because our role is so administrative, and, you know, the coalition as well with kind of overseeing the work, I feel like, you know, the barriers we want to speak to really is in the delivery of service, and where we're going to get that is through the mini grantees. So having that report directly from them is very helpful. NYSERC developed a template that's preloaded with their target goals. That was also something learned, where, you know, before they were kind of giving a report, but they weren't tying it back to what they had set out to do with these funds. So now there's a preloaded template for them to use, so that they can like be like, oh yeah, we said we were going to do this, so I'm going to speak to how we were successful or where we struggled. So before that was implemented, you know, there was some inconsistencies, and there really wasn't an actual outcome that they were providing. Same process for the final report, and that's due 15 days after the end of the contract. Just some other things that we think are relevant to mention, you know, offering mini grants and having them focused on building volunteer models really does provide options with limited resources. We found a lot of success with it, although, you know, we've encountered some challenges. I think that overall, I think it's worthwhile to do. The timing, you know, I will say this is one difficulty we still have, where, you know, because of the way that we structure ourselves in us funding the coalition, and then the coalition being the ones to do the RFP process and award the grants, you know, trying to make those funds available as early as possible can sometimes be difficult. We did add a disclaimer in the RFP, and we're fortunate that where NYSERC is housed at Lifespan of Greater Rochester, that the not-for-profit there, and, you know, the executive director, Anne Marie Cook, she, you know, gets approval through the board of being able, you know, since we have a commitment for the funds, of, as long as this disclaimer is on there, of releasing the RFP, you know, as quickly as we can, so that they can have an early start time, because sometimes they only have 8-9 months. We try to give them 10. Because it is annualized budgets, but so that's one challenge that we continue to work with. And some of the other things that have been learned that we think are important to think about is setting parameters around timelines for invoicing. Be crystal clear about what those requirements are, including what's acceptable for any backup documentation. Receiving invoices to be done at least once a quarter. It really helps to avoid any procrastination, and it also gives NYSERC, you know, an understanding of where they are in the process. So by having those invoices come in, you can see like right away if something's happening where they're having a hard time spending the money, or they're not, recruiting the volunteers, and then you can kind of do a reach out and offer some technical assistance. And there was a protocols document that we shared with Jill as well, and Doris can speak to this as well. But the coalition created this document, and it is part of their contract with the grantee, because they want to make sure the grantee is very clear and that they can't kind of come back and say, oh, you never told me that. So that was something new that Doris created to be part of the contract. That is all I have for my comments, but I will give Doris a chance to fill in any blanks and offer some additional details since she's more involved with the work.
Thanks, Dina. You did a great job. Dina asked me to give my input on all the questions that Jill wanted support from. So I think that we've covered it. That communication protocol piece, though, has been critical for us, because I would hear, oh, I didn't know we had to have the report in, or I don't know what's supposed to be in the report, or I don't know who to send the invoices to, and all that. So we decided to make it really, really, really clear, and what our expectation was, particularly around data collection for the caregiver survey. Our return rates in the beginning were pitiful, and we really needed to put some effort into making sure that we were getting better feedback. So with the things that Dina talked about, the monthly reminders and the online respite reporting has been really, really helpful for us. I just want to shout out that, we've gotten funding for some significant new initiatives. And so I'm moving the mini grants over to Rebecca Hyde, who I see is on the call, and I saw she put something in the chat. I don't know if you want to turn your camera on, Rebecca, that put you on the spot. But Rebecca's going to be handling all the mini grants. There she is. And I'm really excited that there'll be somebody else kind of taking this initiative in the coalition. So I hope you've learned a little bit, Rebecca, because I just handed this over to her and she's had very little training in it, and we're just gonna fly with it. But I wanted you all to know Rebecca is with us and we're thrilled. So I think that's it. Unless somebody has questions for us.
I just thought of one other thing as you were talking, Doris, that I remembered that we added too with like the reporting portal. When we were doing the federal reports, one of the things that was difficult for me and like looking at the data was trying to identify an unduplicated count of caregivers, just because we had a lot of caregivers that were staying on, right? Since it's volunteers, they were just consistently staying on and getting respite care. So that was actually something new that we asked the grantees to start reporting to us, tell us how many new, and then we can figure out the unduplicated. So that was really helpful, just from a reporting aspect.
Yeah, we learn more every year, right? And we do our best. We gave out smaller grants this year. Last year, we wanted to give out $50,000 grants, two $50,000 grants, because we really did find that the more money they had, the more obvious, the more ability they had to move on. We don't ask them about sustainability because we really feel like the grants are so small. So I have to think about that, Kathy. So thank you for sharing that. We don't ask them to come up with sustainability plans because our approach is, first, it's a little bit of money and we don't want to make it too burdensome. But we want them we want this to be like a spot where they could try a new idea, right? And not necessarily have to sustain it, but to think out of the box and try something new and maybe do something a little bit more exciting so we don't put that piece in on purpose, but it was interesting to hear your side of that. So thank you.
We don't put it in, but I know with Jefferson last year, right, with her grant, we did get one of the AAAs that kind of was asking about a way, because in particular, she wanted to see about using 3E funds, which makes sense. And we were fine with it. But I will say one of the things with that was we just had to kind of talk through different requirements on what they were kind of calling it and treating it, because it became a question of, well, are they operating a senior center, and are they like, it became like we really had to kind of like, you know, pull in some people and help them understand the scope of work and what she built under the Lifespan Respite through the coalition, and what she was trying to continue, since it was, you know, serving quite a number of caregivers, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to make it successful. So we kind of had to talk that through and help educate people so that they understood, right, just from a regulation standpoint, that it was not what they were thinking it was. So it was interesting.
Yeah, and one of our grantees reapplied this year, and we had funded them at a very high amount last year, I think $47,000. And when I told her that I could only give her $10,000, she's like, "That's a huge cut." And I said, it's not meant to be sustained funding, right? It's a mini grant. It's very time limited. So don't do your planning of sustainability around this grant, because that's not going to be helpful for you. But it was a difficult conversation to have.
Excellent presentations, everyone. Really wonderful. On the sustainability question, though, could it be the role of the coalition to, when these, even if they're tiny mini grants, to work from the grantees, to work with the grantees from the beginning to help them think about other funding sources? I mean, it's a little bit tricky to start a new wonderful respite program for caregivers and then take it away, you know, a year later.
I know.
So to really engage with them in sustainability planning from day one, knowing that maybe they'll only get another $5,000, but it might keep it going for a few more months, and just to have that plan in place, I think might be helpful.
I think probably I would say that perhaps we have that conversation. I don't know if we have the bandwidth to help them do the sustainability planning as to much as say, you know, we'd like you to think about this. It's not a requirement for the grant, but we really would. And one of the other pieces is it's not always a new respite program, but a new twist to something that actually already exists, something more that they might be able to do under what they're doing under other funding as well. So it's not just to say, here's $10,000, go start a program, because that's like nearly impossible.
Right.
Yeah, that's true, but not totally impossible. There was
Not
a program
totally, but
many
nearly.
years ago in Pennsylvania, the Take 5 program that was funded through the Maternal and Child Health division that Mary Jo Elamina Caruso, she was hired as specifically for technical assistance with these mini grants across the state. And she spent the entire year doing nothing but technical assistance with these grantees to grow and sustain their efforts, and most of them are still up and running.
Sounds like Lisa Rude's position, Doris.
Yeah,
in Buffalo,
in
because that's what she,
Western New
and it's interesting how they structured themselves too. And I got to hear a little bit more because we went to a meeting recently about how that all came to fruition. But she's hired as a consultant with, you know, a goal of like reaching, you know, 10 new faith-based organizations to basically help them start up, and giving them all the tools they need to function. And they call her for technical assistance. I think in the agreement, it says that they get one TA call, but she says she helps them if needed, you know. But they've grown immensely. I feel like what is there, over 30 out there now, just in Buffalo area?
31 churches or synagogues are involved in providing monthly respite in the Buffalo region. And to your point, Jill, it's not nearly impossible, because the way those faith communities started was Lisa, who's now the queen of Western New York when it comes to respite, but she worked for an office for the aging and wanted to start respite in her church. And she went to the OFA director and he said, okay, I'll give you $1,000. So she used the $1,000 to buy supplies, right? And start the program. And now the county continues to support any church or faith community that wants to start one with a measly $1,000, and they do it. And, you know, to Daphne Johnson's point, she's the queen in Alabama of all this respite stuff, but money flows in from grateful caregivers to support these programs. They're finding it in Western New York, and certainly Daphne's found it in the Alabama programs. So it is doable. But the mini grants don't always support faith communities. We're much more diverse in the kinds
Right.
of respite that can be provided, because we really do want to provide a menu.
Right.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
I definitely heard what you said about, not necessarily having the bandwidth to provide that level of technical assistance. And that's really sort of what I was addressing. Maybe as the lifespan grantees think about initiating, or others think about initiating mini grant programs, that you build into that the cost
Yeah.
of ongoing and meaningful technical assistance on the part of yourselves as being the
absolutely.
doing
Yeah. Yeah, no,
providers.
I would agree. I would agree
It
with
costs money. We're not saying you should just do it for free.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think that's one of the benefits of the grants, is because it can pay for that staff. And I would say that I think the technical assistance is as important to sustainability as the money is, particularly in the faith community, because the average when we were doing the first break rooms, that we would award up to $6,000, but the average that they actually used was only about $3,500. Because that funding really was for startup. It was to modify a place. It was to either get furniture. Some of them brought in, sound equipment so that they could pipe in the service for the time that folks were there. And because it was volunteer based, they were really pulling from the talent that they had in their congregation. And a lot of our work over the years has been that, but to sustain it, it really was, if you lost the lead caregiver, then you really needed that additional technical assistance to come back in and help them regroup and help them move forward. I do like a lot of what I've heard here about maybe using that technical assistance to find other funding sources that can sustain or even grow additional resources. But another thing that we've used for technical assistance is to pull from the break rooms or other types of respite and use them and connect, different faith groups to those that are working and let them show and demonstrate how it works. So the full technical assistance doesn't fall back on us because we have not funded it fully. But I think there's a lot of different ways to accomplish that. And sometimes it's bringing two churches together because neither one of them are big enough to do it on their own, but combined, they can actually develop a pretty good program.
Or a
I don't know.
community-based agency paired with a faith community. Aren't you
Yes.
doing that?
Say that again?
South Carolina?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah,
Jill,
actually,
I don't know if you want me to talk about the AmeriCorps grant that we just received, but under that grant, we have a target of 9 new drop-ins in faith communities in Central New York region, helping to use AmeriCorps seniors to help staff those programs. So we're really excited about that. And we certainly didn't leave out faith communities when it came to wanting to spread respite options across the state. But I'm just going to say one other thing, and it was, I'm sure many of you were at the Madison, Wisconsin Arch Conference. But I walked away from that conference with a mind-blowing to me thing that Kim Whitmore said, which was, respite is an outcome, it's not a service.
Mhm.
And something went in my head, like, what?
Yeah.
That's wild, because that's how we always look at respite, as a service. And we're going to fund mini grants to provide a service, and we're going to service. But respite is it means so
Much
many
bigger
different
than
things
that,
to so
right.
many different people, that we're actually, even in the voucher program, we're kind of expanding our idea of what respite is. Like, can someone actually pay? And I think this was the example that Rebecca came to me with. Somebody wanted to hire someone to rake the leaves in her mother's yard because the caregiver just didn't have time to get it done. And Rebecca said to the caregiver, well, what are you going to do in place of raking those leaves? And she goes, I'm going to go home and take a nap. And so to me, it was like, oh, maybe we can just think about it that way and provide respite services. And just thinking about if the caregiver's getting a break, that's an outcome, and we need to be flexible and understanding to and responsive to the caregiver needs. That's all I wanted to say, because it's changed the way I talk about respite everywhere I go. You can tell Kim I said so.
Well, Kim was not the first one to say that, believe me. This has been an ongoing.
No, I know. I had a researcher send me articles after I said.
An ongoing discussion for 30 years about the definition of respite. And for many years, I was an ardent supporter of, well, that's true, but when we're talking about specific dollars for
Right.
respite, I was very adamant that it be the actual care provided to the individual, because there were other sources of funding for family support. You know, family support's been around for decades and decades.
Right.
Where you give funds to the family to let them use it for what they really need. And I mean, the Family Caregiver Support Program provides some of that. The developmental disabilities programs provide some of those dollars. So I was always so protective of our respite dollars, not for the outcome, but for the care that was provided. But the pandemic really changed that for me, because
It did. Yep.
we can't always rely on those formal care options to provide respite. And I was very glad to see that ACL was also willing to be more flexible with the use of those dollars. But I still worry that we have so few respite dollars focused on the care provided to the individual so the caregiver can get a real break.
Yeah.
So, you know, somebody coming to rake the leaves is a wonderful thing, but the person with Alzheimer's is still sitting in the house without anybody watching them.
True.
So it's a wonderful concept, and I think we really have to rethink about the definition of respite, but not lose sight of the limited funding that we have for respite care. And I applaud all of you who are thinking creatively about what respite means and how to provide it. And I fully support all of those new efforts to be adaptive and innovative in that regard, because we don't really have the choice anymore to not be that flexible.
And you know, Jill, and I know it's not a new concept, but just the way it was stated so simply to me that opened my eyes. And I just feel like it's so important to spread that concept as far and wide as we can and keep the conversation going.
I applaud that.
Doris, there was a question in the chat about the online portal, which I know I have seen it, but it's been a very long time. It's password protected, right? On the website, and it's homegrown.
Yeah, it's password protected, so only the grantees have access to the site. It's based on our website, and they simply go in and put in their data, and then it all dumps into one spreadsheet for us, so that's really simple to gather. And we've really made an effort to make that happen on a monthly basis, because if we don't, the data gets lost. You know, it just wasn't happening for us. But since we implemented that monthly reminder with the link and with the post respite survey, you know, our numbers have gotten much better. Our response rate is much higher.
And I didn't mention this, but the data all goes from NYSERC to our paid evaluator and to us at the state office.
Right.
Mhm.
I think the Performance Measurement Learning Collaborative would love to hear about this online portal.
Right.
Hear
Yeah.
more
Right.
about the mechanics of how.
Well, I'm going to drag Sharon into that one then. So
I'll have to let Cassandra know that you guys can present on that too. Oh my goodness.
Absolutely.
hey, Jill, thanks.
There was another question here too about from Utah and Arizona. Have faith communities brought up the issue of liability?
Every single time.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Kathy, but that's the #1 question out there.
It's been a question, but it hasn't been that much of a barrier to it. I think part of it is because they're serving their own congregation, and they have events you know, at the church all the time. I mean, and we've had programs in synagogues as well, but I think that's one of the reasons, you know, one of the things that we've really tried to address with them, though, is having policies in place related to whether it's abuse and neglect, or, you know, just kind of a variety of things. And that's been one of our responses to the liability issue is, you know, is that to really have policies in place related to things. If they've got, you know, attorneys there that can help develop forms, if they've got, you know, most churches that have a children's program or a youth program have gotten a lot of those policies in place. So it hasn't been a barrier to people really wanting to develop programs. So it is a question, but it hasn't been a barrier.
Yeah, and we always ask that. We had an attorney at one of our early conferences when I had taken on the coalition, and it was like, go to your insurance provider and ask them, you know, you're not providing medical support, you're not passing meds, you're not really doing anything that you wouldn't do in a daily activity
Right.
at the church. And so in most cases, they already have insurance that covers it, and it's
Right.
not an issue. But it's always an issue up front in their minds. It's the first issue that has to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would also refer you to the chapter on liability in the Arch Volunteer Respite
Yes.
Manual.
Yeah.
I
Right.
think it was actually, it might have been the lawyer at your conference, Doris, who said everybody should read the Arch chapter because it was the
Oh,
best
yay.
chapter he had seen on liability and volunteer programs. So hopefully that information will be helpful to you. Anyone else have any questions for our presenters? I'd like to know if there's anyone out there who has been administering mini grant programs that we may not be aware of. And if you're already doing mini grants for volunteer or faith-based respite, or maybe any mini grant program that could be
Right.
applicable to a volunteer or faith-based program, but that you might have additional tools or approaches that we didn't discuss today. No one else? I assume some of you are thinking about implementing mini grant programs, and that's why you're here today. So that's wonderful. All of you are just incredible presenters with wonderful information, and the detail that you went into, I think, will just be so helpful to everyone in the documents that you shared also. It's just so great to have that step-by-step information of, you know, okay, mini grant sounds like a great idea, but how do you actually do it?
Right.
So thank you very much for talking about everything from the planning stages to partnerships to the application itself, how to get the funding announcement out there, how to provide the technical assistance. That was all extremely helpful information. So we'll make sure that the recording of this event gets shared widely with your permission as well. Any other questions? Anyone else have any updates you'd like to share about your volunteer or faith-based efforts? Well, you have everyone's attention today.
I will say something that you alluded to earlier is that in our current grant, we've expanded that break room model to the community. And what we're really trying to do, again, because we don't have a lot of money for it, is bring community groups and faith groups together and build kind of partnerships at the local level. So I know that that we had been working, and I think the senior centers, I think New York was talking about the senior centers as a good resource. We're really looking at utilizing the senior centers in that partnership, and whether we bring a local, you know, church to the table that might have volunteers, or another group like a rec center or Boys and Girls Club or whatever. And in some ways that's getting kind of that intergenerational approach again as well, but really looking at what kind of local partnerships we can pull together. Again, we think that speaks well for sustainability, because if we get them working together, then it doesn't fall on one organization to do it. And I know that Melissa has actually been working with Lisa's Care Connection here in Columbia, that was started by Lisa Gibbons in really in honor of her mother, who had dementia, and her father, who was a long-term caregiver. But really, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to that, Melissa, on what we're trying to do with that.
So with them, they have groups that already come. So they already have caregivers coming and participating in different things. And they have a space set aside called the Serenity Room that has massage chairs. So they already had some stuff already there, which was a great partnership idea, with seeing that our amount was less. And so we have been working with them on brainstorming what could we offer that would be beneficial. And so getting some of like robotic dogs, or so we're in the talks of figuring out what could be beneficial for their caregivers who already are participating, and then looking to see if we can partner together and with some of the church contacts they have, and kind of look at seeing if there might be a way to replicate, because between the two of us, there's a handful of churches that could potentially be interested. So kind of working with them and then continuing the partnership into another church or community location. But yeah, just kind of seeing what each person can bring to the table. And so we're looking at things that we could purchase that kind of just really enriches the time for the people involved.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing, and that is we have a real focus on partnering with schools and universities at this point.
Yes.
We've funded several of them through our mini grants. One of them we funded, again, it was one of the first mini grants we ever gave, in that last year they got an Arch Exemplary Award. They've been going for a very, very long time. And that was through Geneseo University. So they've had a shift in leadership. And so we wanted to make sure that we were supporting them in that transition. So we're partnering with them. We're partnering with a mini grant for Ithaca College, but some of them do one-on-one respite, and some of them are doing congregate respite, but it doesn't matter to us, because the beauty of schools and universities is the intergenerational piece. But maybe, just maybe, we get a small percentage of those people who go, oh my God, I love this. This could be my career, right? This is something that turns me on. I heard a speaker this morning, what's your why? And so if they find out if it's that's their why, then we might even make a small dent in the workforce shortage by just giving students an opportunity to know what it is, and that it could be their passion.
I mean, that's the beauty of this whole mini grant approach too, is that it's key to building capacity. Including not only just in expanding the availability of the actual service, but in training and recruiting new workers into the field. I think it's really critical. And Doris, as you move along with your senior companion program too, we'd love to hear more about how you're recruiting those senior volunteers and how well.
I would too, Jill.
Well, you know, Tennessee's been using senior companions for a long time on a much smaller basis, I think in one county in Tennessee. So I don't know, they might have some insights.
Okay.
There's some folks in Idaho too that also I think have used not senior companions, but AmeriCorps volunteers also.
AmeriCorps seniors is what that's the language that we're being required to use.
Yeah, that's the new name for the program. They really don't use senior companions anymore, but it's going to be around for so long. It's going to take me a long time to change.
The beauty of this though is that, you know, we are going to funnel these folks into the respite workforce, and they're all required to use our online respite training, which we've just taken on. We haven't finished the pilot with Wisconsin, but we're committed to it, right? So and that's our way to funnel people into that training as well. So we're really excited about that connection.
Yeah,
that's
Doris,
really awesome. I can't wait to see how that goes.
Yeah, we're right there with you. Melissa and I were actually talking about that the other day when I saw the notice of the award that you got, in trying to follow up. So expect a phone call from us, because we were going to pick your brain about that. But because we've been looking at not only the senior AmeriCorps, but also Learn and Serve. We've had conversations with the College of Social Work and the School of Nursing here at USC, and really how we can tap
Well,
into that.
They just put out another funding award for the senior demonstration project for workforce development. And
Okay.
might want
We
to
need
look
to-
into
no,
that.
Yeah, we do, because we're the same thing. We've got the training portal now, and we're building additional modules for for family caregivers
Yeah.
as well as
Yeah.
for the respite ones. But we're looking, we've got a registry up, and so we've got the infrastructure for the training, and want to tie in a variety of different workforce elements to that.
Isn't
So
it so cool? It's so
really
cool.
is.
It
Yes,
all just
it's all
came
coming
together at the
together.
right
it's all
time. you know?
coming together. That's right. Yeah.
I'm so glad
Yeah.
it's so helpful. That's wonderful. Excellent. Well, we're right at just about 4 o'clock Eastern time. I'll give anyone else on the call a last chance to share what's going on in your state, or anything you'd like to talk about, or introduce yourselves in the last couple of minutes, or if you have any questions for our presenters. You all are invited to our other learning collaboratives as well. We have our sustainability planning learning collaborative that we're bringing together our November and December meetings on a new date because of the holidays. So the next sustainability collaborative will be December 9th. And Cassandra wanted me to make sure that you all knew the performance measurement learning collaborative will be held December 15th at 1 p.m. Eastern, and I'll be sending out the notice for that very soon too. But so much of what you all talked about in terms of data collection for your mini grant programs, I'm going to share with Cassandra too, because you had some wonderful tools and processes there for collecting data. So
Maybe you could give us January or February, Jill.
we'll give you a break. You can have the
Thank you.
holidays off. I'll have to hire you all as consultants to Arch.
There you go. We can use the funding,
Training TA.
sustainability.
Well, thank you all so much for your time today. Thank you for joining us, and be on the lookout for the announcements about the other upcoming learning collaboratives, and have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and stay safe
Thank
from
you,
the
Jill.
storm in South
Thanks.
Carolina.
Thank you.